Okay, let's jump into this deep dive. We're exploring a fascinating and frankly pretty unnerving idea today.
Hmm.
How certain visions, especially, among some powerful tech figures, see ecological collapse not just as a crisis, but as a kind of opportunity.
Right. An opportunity for market expansion and, well, for building entirely new, often exclusive worlds.
Exactly. And we're pulling our insights primarily from an excerpt of Jonas Stahl's article, The Extinction Loop, published in the MIT Press Reader.
That's the run.
So our mission really is to unpack this concept the source calls the extinction loop. We want to understand the thinking behind it, maybe look at specific examples of these futuristic projects.
Yeah, both on Earth and, off-world.
Right, and figure out how the messaging, the propaganda maybe, makes them seem appealing while perhaps obscuring what's really going on underneath.
We're going to guide you through what the source lays out as the core of this perspective, based directly on the material provided.
Okay, so to really get at this idea, let's actually start way back. Back in history with a story of survival on a remote island. It surprisingly echoes some modern fantasies.
Okay.
Imagine this. May 5, 1725. A Dutch soldier, Leander Hazenbosch, is put ashore and basically abandoned on this tiny, barren spot in the Atlantic, Ascension Island.
Right. He'd committed some offense on his ship, apparently.
Yeah, and he was left there with almost nothing. A tent, some water, rice, a couple buckets, a pan.
And a musket.
Yeah.
But crucially, no ammunition.
No ammo. And his struggle is incredibly detailed because English sailors later found his diary. It just chronicles his growing desperation.
Yeah, those final entries are tough to read.
Brutal. Trying to survive by sucking blood from a bird, drinking turtle urine.
Yeah.
His body, never found.
Now, fast forward a couple of centuries.
Yeah.
The British Crown claims that exact same island.
Right.
And it becomes this incredible, almost unbelievable testing ground. Not for human survival against nature this time, but for large-scale geoengineering.
Geoengineering, wow.
Yeah, think Joseph Dalton Hooker, Charles Darwin, they were involved. Importing plants, seeds from all over the world, deliberately transforming this stark volcanic rock into like a green imperial outpost.
Right. Turning Terra Nullius's land, seen as belonging to no one, into something else entirely, artificially.
Exactly, and it later served as a vital military site in WWII.
A staging ground.
Yeah, and it remains largely inaccessible today, basically only via military transport. No real permanent population.
Okay, so why is this history relevant now?
Well, the source argues it mirrors a certain modern mindset. This idea of terra nullius that gets reimagined, applied not just to unclaimed land, but, to oceans for floating cities or even...
Or even entire planets like Mars.
Exactly. Viewing them as blank slates, experimental sites, ripe for engineering and claiming.
Okay, so let's make that jump then. From that historical experiment to the modern visions. On one hand, you have the dream of escaping a world that's increasingly, drowned.
Yeah. This is where the source points to figures like venture capitalist Peter Thiel and his concept for the Seasteading Institute.
Seasteading, what does that look like?
Visually, think something straight out of a sci-fi rendering. Sleek white hexagon modules, all linked together. Luxury villas on top, yachts nearby, green spaces.
Sort of like that Apple Park campus, but floating?
The source makes that exact comparison. Like Norman Foster's Apple Park, but buoyant. And it's designed quite specifically for a drowned world.
Okay, and the critical insight here, according to the source, is that for someone like Thiel, this impending flooded world isn't just a catastrophe.
No, it becomes raw material for new geo-markets to emerge. That's the quote.
Raw material. Wow, did this get anywhere?
He actually made significant headway. At one point, he almost had the French Polynesian government on board to support an autonomous settlement.
Really? Why would they consider that?
Well, think about it. As rising sea levels threaten actual islands, the idea of transitioning to floating ones, maybe even transferring some sovereignty, it was apparently seen as a potential, perhaps desperate measure.
But it didn't happen.
No, it ultimately fell apart. Local residents in Tahiti protested. They saw it, as the source puts it, as tech colonialism.
Tech colonialism. Okay.
Yeah.
And what's driving this vision, ideologically speaking?
The source identifies a powerful influence, Ayn Rand's novel, Atlas Shrugged, from 1957.
Ah, okay.
The book posits this scenario where the most productive capitalists basically abandon society. They go on strike against what they see as overregulation, taxation by looters, the state, the public.
Right, to build their own utopia.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A rationalist utopia based on absolute individual sovereignty, dismantling the welfare state.
And the source connects Thiel directly to this.
It's quite direct, yeah. It says Thiel's floating island concept essentially follows the textbook libertarian scripture known as Atlas Shrugged.
Okay, so that's one side, escaping a drowning Earth. What's the other side of this elite vision?
The other looks beyond Earth entirely. This is where figures like Elon Musk with SpaceX, Jeff Bezos with Blue Origin come in. The focus shifts to settling Mars as a backup planet.
Right, the Mars colony idea.
Musk himself is quoted articulating this choice. Faced an inevitable extinction event here on Earth, or humanity becomes a spacefaring civilization and a multiplanetary species.
And Mars, through this particular libertarian lens, how is it viewed?
Similarly to how colonial powers might have viewed lands declared terra nullius back then, it's seen as a dead planet, an untapped resource, basically a fossil waiting to be exploited, engineered.
Like Ascension Island, but on a planetary scale.
Kind of, yeah. And the source points to a really revealing detail about this mindset. It's in the SpaceX Starlink Satellite User Agreement.
What does it say?
Clause 10. It states that for services provided on Mars, the parties recognize Mars as a free planet, and that no Earth-based government has authority or sovereignty over Martian activities.
A free planet, meaning free for Martians.
The source clarifies. No. Free here translates to proprietary rights for SpaceX. The freedom to extract, to engineer, without any interference from Earth-based governments or regulators.
Got it. So whether it's these floating cities or a Mars colony, the underlying goal seems consistent.
It appears so, according to the source.
Uh-huh.
Build these terraformed biospheres, where this particular brand of libertarian rule can be absolute. Extinction isn't the end.
It's a market opportunity.
Yeah, the chance for market expansion, the opportunity to monopolize its ruins.
And who gets to go? Is this for everyone?
The source makes it very clear. No, highly exclusive. That first Seasteading Institute, aimed at only 200 people.
200?
Yeah. These visions, what the source calls the extinction dream, are explicitly presented as being for the elite's elite, the sort of pre-selected trillionaire survivors.
Which brings us to the obvious question. Who's paying for all this? These are incredibly expensive dreams.
Exactly. And the source draws a direct and pretty stark line from the cost of these dreams back to precarious labor right here on Earth.
Yeah.
Well, think about Jeff Bezos right after his, 11-minute trip to the edge of space with Blue Origin.
Right. I remember that.
He specifically thanked every Amazon employee and every Amazon customer because you guys paid for all of this.
Wow. And the source elaborates on how they paid for it?
It does. It describes conditions like working uncontracted, facing bans on unionizing, lacking Social Security, reports of workers being forced to urinate in bottles or wear diapers just to meet grueling production targets in these windowless warehouses. It illustrates, according to the source, the very real human cost borne by workers on Earth that effectively bankrolls these futuristic escape fantasies. It's a central, often kind of hidden part of the picture the source presents.
Okay, so if these visions are so exclusive, funded this way, how do they gain any traction? How do they seem viable, even desirable to anyone else?
Propaganda. The source emphasizes the absolutely critical role of propaganda in making these projects feel real, feel appealing, specifically by rendering the future, making the future visible.
Rendering the future, you mean the visuals?
Exactly. It's the visual language, the glossy allure, as the source calls it, of these high-tech, sci-fi-like visualizations. But the argument is that they hide the disasters that enable them to come into being.
Hide the disasters? How?
Well, it's like looking at a polished computer model of a beautiful floating city, right? But that image doesn't show you the millions of climate refugees, the water wars, the deaths caused by the ecological breakdown that supposedly necessitates the floating city in the first place.
I see.
The source draws a really powerful analogy. It compares it to buying an Apple product. The sleek user experience completely hides the, quote, ruthless reality of the Foxconn factory gulags where the device was actually assembled.
So these renderings always show the ideal outcome.
Consistently. Greenified Mars, pristine floating cities, environments that look high-tech, seem to require minimal labor, and are presented as luxurious, harmonious, even democratic sometimes.
And the source suggests this isn't just artists being creative. There's a strategy.
Yeah, it argues these libertarian projects are actively appropriating mainstream science fiction tropes and CGI techniques. They use a deliberate strategy the source calls product placing.
product placing, like in Movier.
Exactly like in movies. But here, the tech industry and industrial designers intentionally insert technology they're developing into mainstream sci-fi films.
Why would they do that?
It's a form of conditioning, basically.
Yeah.
See, I don't know, a body scanner in a film like Running Man, and later when you encounter a real one at airport security, it feels familiar, less alien.
Like the electric vehicles in Gattaca maybe prefiguring Tesla, or touchscreens in Minority Report before the iPhone.
Precisely those examples. The source is clear. This familiarity isn't accidental. It's a planned strategy to make future products instantly recognizable and therefore more easily accepted when they launch.
Okay, and how does this apply to the climate stuff?
According to the source, this technique has been fully appropriated by what it calls libertarian climate propaganda.
Can you give an example?
A key one the source provides involves these sci-fi-esque designs for smart city architectures. These were commissioned by Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO.
Smart cities. Okay. How did he see them?
He viewed cities as fundamentally data architectures. He described them as extractive interfaces designed to harvest citizens' data movements, behaviors, health info, you name it.
Extractive interfaces. That sounds concerning.
And the source specifically notes that he saw the COVID-19 pandemic as a prime opportunity to push these models, leveraging the public health crisis to potentially shift city governance towards these data-driven, often privately controlled systems.
So using the crisis to implement the tech.
That's the argument presented. And the source explicitly compares Schmidt's smart city models to the work of the famous sci-fi film designer Sid Mead.
The guy who did Blade Runner Tomorrowland.
That's him, highlighting the repetition of this exact product placing strategy, applying it now not just to gadgets but to the future of urban life itself.
Which leads us to another concept you mentioned. Extinction design.
Right. The source describes this as a crucial contribution from the creative industries. These smart cities, the Mars colonies, they aren't just sold as practical survival solutions. They're also marketed as instances of aesthetic futurism.
Making survival look cool.
In a way, yeah. The source profiles designer Dan Rusgaard as a prime example.
What kind of work does he do? Who are his clients?
Big names. ING Bank, BMW, even NASA. And the source argues his work provides what it calls an aesthetic experience of survival for the Earth's elites.
An aesthetic experience of survival. What does that mean in practice?
Well, examples range from a smart highway that glows in the dark to his smog-free tower, which is this striking sculpture that gives the illusion of quickly pulling carbon from the air. It's a visual statement more than a large-scale solution.
Okay.
And maybe most pointedly, there's this smog-free ring. This is actual jewelry made from condensed smog particles collected by the tower.
Wait, turning pollution into jewelry.
Literally merchandising pollution, creating a product out of the problem rather than fundamentally addressing, the source of the pollution.
Huh. Any other examples?
He also has the Space Waste Lab. It uses projected green light to map space debris with the aim of eventually capturing and recycling it into new products. More merchandising, essentially.
So the critique here is what?
The source's critique is sharp. This approach focuses entirely on transforming pollution or waste or even extinction itself into marketable goods or aesthetic experiences. It completely sidesteps the systemic causes generating the problems in the first place. For this perspective, extinction is framed as a design opportunity first and foremost.
And you can see how these pieces fit together, right? The smog towers and the seasteading renders.
Exactly. Or the Space Waste Lab concept aligning perfectly with Musk or Bezos' space programs. As the source puts it, quite bluntly, extinction is their shared market.
Their shared market. Okay, so this brings us to the core idea you mentioned at the start, the extinction loop.
Yes. This is the central concept the source identifies, kind of binding all these elements together. It's described as a self-reinforcing cycle.
Okay, unpack that. A self-reinforcing cycle, how does it work?
Well, the source describes it like this. It starts with libertarians embracing highly extractive industries and practices. Think fossil fuels, unregulated tech, that kind of thing.
Okay, which accelerates.
Which inherently accelerates ecosystem collapse and climate change. But, and this is the crucial twist, instead of seeing this collapse as a failure to be reversed.
They see it as a resource. You said that earlier.
Exactly. Climate collapse itself becomes the resource.
How does that work? That sounds contradictory.
It does, but the logic presented is that this collapse enables them to then construct these privately owned, geoengineered, terraformed biospheres, whether on water, like seasteading, or on other planets, like Mars.
And these operate under different rules.
Under what the source describes as techno-feudalist rule, where power is concentrated in the hands of the tech owners and their allies. And these new worlds are then adorned with that extinction design we just talked about, making it all look sleek and futuristic.
So the solutions they propose, like carbon capture or floating cities, they aren't really about fixing the original problem.
Not primarily, according to the source. They are framed, perhaps cynically, as the desirable consequences of the accelerationist planetary disasters they engineered themselves.
Wow, consequences they engineered themselves.
Yeah. The source links this thinking to a group it calls the corporate dystopian cult known as the Dark Enlightenment, which apparently advocates for more authoritarian forms of governance, often enabled by technology.
So the core logic of this loop is
Extinction is their currency. That's the takeaway from the source. There's no contradiction, in this view, in contributing to the ruin of existing living worlds, because accelerating ungovernability, the breakdown of the current public regulated systems, is actually seen as the point.
breaking the old system makes space for their new one.
Exactly. It clears the ground, literally and figuratively, allowing them to engineer and install their own private worlds under their absolute control in place of the collapsing old system.
So the future they envision, it actually requires the existing world to break down.
The source's argument is pretty stark on this. The future literally relies on our demise.
Which brings us back full circle to that historical story, Leonard Hasenbosch on Ascension Island.
It's a powerful and, troubling image the source leaves us with.
Tell us.
Just as Hasenbosch's bones might be buried somewhere under the engineered artificial biosphere of Ascension Island today, the source suggests the future bones of the many precarious Earth workers sent to Mars could end up buried under a terraformed Martian world, a world where they have no stakes at all, having built the very escape pods they themselves are excluded from.
That paints a picture that's, a world away from those glossy renderings.
It certainly complicates the simple narrative of technological salvation, doesn't it?
It really does.
Yeah.
So wrapping up this look at the source material, it paints a picture where, for some of the ultra-wealthy, this vision of escaping Earth's collapse isn't just some far-fetched sci-fi story anymore.
No, it's framed as a tangible goal.
Fueled by a specific ideology rooted deeply in libertarianism, maybe works like Atlas Shrugged. And it's actively propelled forward through, sophisticated propaganda and design. Techniques that manage to recast global disaster as a market opportunity.
Creating this self-serving, self-reinforcing cycle, the Extinction Loop.
And it's crucial, as you highlighted, to remember how the source connects the funding for all this, these futuristic escape pods.
Back to the very present-day exploitation and precarious labor they claim they're trying to leave behind.
Yeah. Okay, so here's something for you, the listener, to think about based on everything we've discussed from the source. If these visions of escape, these engineered futures, depend, as the source argues, on actively accelerating the very collapse they claim to be solving, and if they rely on exploiting the vast majority of people to pay for it, what does that tell us? What does that imply about our collective responsibility, maybe, to seek solutions that actually include, that benefit the vast majority of humanity and the health of the living world, rather than enabling escape for just a select few?
Political question.
How much faith should we really place in the solutions being offered by those who, according to this source, seem to benefit so directly from the problem itself? Something to consider.